Hello everyone, welcome. My name is MJ Petridge. Welcome to the final video in the hardware series. Today we're going to be talking about the display or the monitor, which is a vital piece of hardware for your flight sim. Choosing the wrong monitor or the wrong type of display can severely impact your frames. Just FYI, I used to have a 1080 Ti graphics card and I could achieve 60 FPS, pretty much 80% of the world, in a twin turbo prop plane. If I was in a commercial jet, I'd get 30 FPS. So it is possible to have consistently high good frame rate, but your monitor is directly tied to that frame rate. In fact, it's kind of tied to the GPU as well. So there's kind of like a triangle, like a magic triangle number that has to take place. And I'm going to basically go through the whole thing. So there are three types of displays that you can choose from. And I'm going to describe in each one in each detail with the pros and add-ons for each one. So if you're just getting into flight simulation, you probably learn a lot. And if you've maybe already in flight simulation and you're struggling with your frame rate, it's most likely the type of monitor you're using. So what are the three types of monitors? There are a LCD screen, which is specific for PC, hookup. And obviously you have your LCD televisions, OLED, plasma, and therefore. And then there is the gaming monitors. Now, they're all three very different. They all might seem the same. They all might be LCD for that matter, but they're all very different. Okay, so starting from the worst and going up to the best. So the worst one would be the PC monitor, which is a display specific for hooking up to a PC. In fact, most motherboards now don't actually support the original hookup, which is the VGA cable. Older displays would only have a VGA cable, which is limited in what it can do in terms of its resolution. It doesn't carry sound, and it's very limited in its color reproduction. In fact, it's got very low, or very high, if you look at it, response times. It's not really good for flight simulation. If you're hooking up your PC to an LCD screen via a VGA cable, right there you can change to get better performance out of your simulator. The VGA cable is not a good way to hook up, and the PC monitor, which was a dedicated PC monitor, is more sort of akin for admin work. So to be honest, you could use an LCD monitor with a VGA cable if you're like, say, a streamer and you want to have your chat and all the browsers on one monitor. You can use a VGA cable for that way, and then use, like, say, the HDMI or DVI for your main flight sim monitor. So that's the first one. The second one is an LCD television or a plasma television or a OLED television. Now, these are really good, if not the best, displays, because they come with a host of features on board, which include scaling to the display instead of your PC doing it. So it can actually save on GPU performance. As well as that, they also carry certain noise reduction features, so it helps with anti-aliasing, and you can specify your gamma with a lot of models and really fine-tune the color reproduction and the brightness and the contrast to get a really good picture out of it. I really recommend a high definition television like a 4K, 2K, or even 1080p hookup, because they all carry HDMI, and some even have DVI, which kind of is an even better hookup than HDMI. And then, of course, there is the gaming monitors. Now, a gaming monitor is very restrictive, and it sounds really good on paper, and for gaming, it's brilliant, but for flight sim, it not so much. And now a lot of people will swear by this, that I've got a G-Sync enabled gaming monitor, and it's the smoothest I've ever seen it. And you'd be absolutely right in saying that. The only problem with gaming monitors is they usually come with a fixed display resolution and a fixed refresh. So they have very limited refresh options. So you usually have to go for the highest, which possibly could be like 144 hertz. Some do allow a half refresh rate, so you get 60 hertz or even 30. But most of them are a locked display, which means that you can scale down but it's not the monitor size that will scale down. Like, the resolution of the monitor is the same, and then it's really your graphics card scaling down Windows and any applications it runs, and then scaling it to the 4K display, which means you've got to have a lot of anti-aliasing active to sort of get rid of those jaggies. Now, I'm going to show you something I do in my GPU, which I did show in a previous video. It's a really neat trick, which means you don't actually have to use any anti-aliasing. But in terms of the monitor, I would say a gaming monitor is probably one of the worst ones to get. They are solely really designed for high frame rate usage in video games, not flight simulation. Flight simulation and gaming is two completely different beasts. You know, you start a game and you'll go into a level and there'll be action and there'll be, you know, whatever happens on that level, as it were, and it might only last 1 to 2 hours, but your graphics card's going to get hammered, the frame rate will be going up, and if you're playing like a Call of Duty type game, you know, the lag of your controller to your display is crucial for getting that kill shot before your opponent does. So having a high refresh rate gives you an advantage. Now, in a gaming monitor, it's not exactly a high refresh rate you're getting. There is a sort of technology software as an intermediate that is giving you that perceived ability of high refresh rates. And it's called G-Sync or FreeSync. And basically, it's taking a 75 hertz and doubling it to like 144 and giving you really smooth motion and kind of configuring your Windows operating system so your mouse or your controllers don't feel any lag and you get really smooth motion. Now, the only downside to this is that your graphics card is having to do extra work in coordination with the monitor to achieve this. So, what can happen in the flight sim is you have three choices. You can achieve 144 hertz for your monitor in your GPU, meaning your scenery detail can only be of a certain amount. And it's all about the frame rate. Your GPU is working for the frame rate rather than working for your simulator. Frame rate, don't get me wrong, is absolutely essential for, you know, using a flight simulator. You do need a consistent frame rate, one that doesn't change, one that is stable and that doesn't lag out your controllers and gives you that fluid use, because then when you're coming into land, if your frames suddenly go down and you get stutters, it introduces lag into the controllers and suddenly you can overcompensate and suddenly smash and crash and basically do a landing like I used to do. So FPS is crucial, but when you're using G-Sync or FreeSync, your GPU is sort of prioritizing this FPS, and then whatever's left over performance-wise will go into, you know, your scenery. Now, that basically means unless you're running like a 4090 or a 3090, you're going to have to reduce your settings to allow for this compensation, meaning you're only going to get so much scenery detail in the sim. Lower your frame rate to 60, right? Meaning that you'll get more scenery detail in, and 60 FPS really for flight simulation is the highest frame rate you'll ever need. You don't need anything higher than 60 FPS. Anybody trying to obtain more than 60 FPS is wasting their GPU. They can literally get more scenery detail, more atmospherics, more planes, you know, AI or whatever, from the display rendered, than having to put it all into that extra frame rate. And again, if you go down even further to 30 FPS, again, you can double your scenery amounts. So it's kind of like, what do you want more? Bit more scenery? Or that locked 144 FPS, because whatever your display is in the refresh rate, your GPU has to match it in the frame rate. Otherwise, you get screen tearing, you get lag, or even stutters at the worst case. So if you've got 144 refresh rate, your GPU is trying to get 75 locked, and then it's being doubled for the 144. If you have a GPU setup and a display that is capable of 60 hertz, it's only got to try and get 60 hertz. Again, if you've got it set up for 30 hertz, it's only got to try and get 30 FPS. And the rest of it goes into how much it can load at the same time in that frame rate. the more scenery detail is easier to load with less frames. 30 FPS is smooth enough. Unless, of course, you're a fighter jet and you're skimming the ground at high speed and you're having to whip your camera around. I understand 30 FPS might introduce a stutter here and there. So 60 FPS is absolutely fine. That is more than enough frame rate, especially if you're flying a commercial airliner at 42,000 feet. Your camera in the flight deck does not move around that much. 30 FPS is more than enough for a commercial airliner to be used within your simulator. A 60 FPS situation, maybe if you're doing GA flying, low to the ground, although that can actually be more intensive because low to the ground, there's going to be more scenery objects rendering in to your display, into the view. So actually, you've got more to render. So if anything, you should really be aiming for 60 FPS up at 42,000 feet, where it's not going to be rendering loads, and 30 FPS down on the ground. And don't be afraid to have two different FPSs in your sim. 30 on the ground, and then you take off and you get 60 in the air. So I'm just going to quickly show you how I set up my GPU now. There's two things I do. Obviously, I have an NVIDIA graphics card, and I have it set up in the control panel in both the global and the P3D settings, and I'll go through that in a second. But in your power options, you want to make sure that you've also set up your monitor, whichever you happen to be using. HDMI and DVI cables are preferred way of setting up. I would say DVI has an advantage over HDMI, but like HDMI, you know, I actually disable the sound on my HDIs because I have headphones, but in my power options, for whatever power plan I'm using, and there is a way you can actually unlock this menu to get more options, and there is a link down below to a video that shows you how to do it. But just make sure down here in your display that you make sure that you turn off your display to never, that your advanced color bias is advanced instead of power saving mode, that console lock display timeout is 0 minutes, adaptive display is off, and allow display required policy. Yes, this prevents programs from turning off your display automatically. It's kind of a reverse though. It says allow programs to prevent the display from turning off. Yes, allow them to prevent it. You don't want your display suddenly switching off halfway through a flight because you've got this setting here, you know, set to an hour, which will turn your display off after an hour of use. This is probably the one common most reason why people have fed back to me is suddenly my computer crashed, screen went blank. Actually, your computer didn't crash, it's just your screen turned off, and that was it. And this is probably the menu to fix that. Now, one of the biggest performance killers for any monitor and any simulator is the size of your display, the resolution that you're using in your display. And I'll go into this in great detail, how I save a lot of performance. But the bigger the resolution, the more your GPU has to sweat. Your GPU, sorry. If you have a moderately sized display and you're running 1080p versus a 55-inch 4K, your PC will get more sim objects, more scenery loaded at a better consistent frame rate on the 1080p monitor. So as much you'll get all the great detail in a 4K monitor. And to be honest, 4K, really, if you've got a monitor that I would say is 42 inches or below, there is no point getting a 4K monitor. You're not going to see that extra detail, to be honest. 42 inches, I would say, is the baseline for 4K displays. So 42 inches and above. If you're running a 1080p, you can go down as low as 27 inches up to, you know, say 40 inches, and 1080p is fine. If you've got a display that's less than 27 inches, man, you might as well run standard definition because you ain't going to see any extra detail in the size of your display. The size of your display is a direct result of how much your GPU has to sweat. The bigger the screen, the bigger the resolution, the more textures have to load in at that 4K or 2K or 1080p resolution, and the more your GPU has to sweat to maintain a consistent frame rate. I have a 4K display. I only use it in 2K mode, and then I load 2K textures, and I actually get more performance out of my sim for doing this than loading a full 4K sim, which, in all honesty, the difference between 2K and 4K, unless you're using HDR, is really, there's nothing between it. If you flick on HDR, which I don't agree, I wouldn't recommend doing in Windows 10, at least. I don't know about Windows 11, but Windows 10, it completely screws everything up in terms of brightness. Everything gets blown out, and it's just, I don't think Windows has cracked the HDR thing yet. I turn off HDR in my Windows backend, and I get a great picture quality. Go to the color calibration screen, and you can find that by basically typing in color down in the search bar here, and go open your color management. And if you're using a 1080p or a 2K display, I've got a profile on my Discord, Best RGB, which will accurately set your color and your brightness and your contrast for your sim, so it's not too bright, not too dark, and run through the calibrate display as well. Just open this up and run through it. Now, if you are running a 4K HDR enabled sim, I have another profile which is actually specific for HDR as well in my Discord. So make sure you set these up, and also in your NVIDIA control panel, and I'll just show you now. In terms of your control panel settings, like there is, I'm sure, an AMD version of this, but if you want to be able to basically not run anti-aliasing in your sim, which is a massive performance save, by the way, this will give you 50% more performance if you don't run anti-aliasing. So anti-aliasing can be run, as you know, in the program settings for the actual sim. Mine is turned off on both accounts. And in the sim, I run like 2 times anti-aliasing, a very minimalistic. That's because I use dynamic super resolution, which basically scales your image up to like 5K, and then to the display shrinks it back down again. And in that sort of in that sort of scaling, it actually kind of doesn't require you to use anti-aliasing. This basically improves the quality of sims or games that don't have a lot of anti-aliasing settings, and you know, you don't actually get to run it. So doing it this way actually means you actually don't need to run it. Now, this must be combined with a few other settings of, if you've got a refresh rate, set it to the highest available. Your shader cache must be unlimited, and regularly delete these shader cache files. You can find them, and I've left a folder on my desktop, but if you go to App Data Local, NVIDIA, DX Cache, and then basically in this menu, you want to basically delete all these files that will allow to be deleted. Sometimes not all of them will be, depending on what you're doing, but delete these folders. These files can get corrupt if they're left, and it can actually build to an insane amount of disk space on your PC. So regularly flush this out, and you will find you have a much more stable sim as well. I have texture filtering on here, and I allow the LOD bias, and my quality is set for performance, and I allow trilinear optimization, which in the sim I also have trilinear as well. And I set my vertical sync to fast, which is basically the same as turning it off. It's an unconstrained GPU setting, and then I back that up because I have the highest available setting. In the sim settings here, I set for 60 FPS, which also, if I go to my resolution, it's 60 Hertz. I use the NVIDIA color settings here with the full dynamic output because this is a 4K screen. Although I scale it down to 2560-1440, and then in my sim I run 2K textures. In honesty, you won't know the difference. You won't see the difference at all. I also override to reference mode for accurate color reproduction, and make sure as well that the perform scaling is on the display. Also, one setting I guess you might want to set up is make sure this is not set to CPU. Make sure it's your GPU that is selected and not the auto either, because that will flick it between your CPU and your GPU and cause you performance issues. So setting it up this way as well. And now these settings here, I have gone through these in my GPU video, so I won't do it now, but these settings combined with a refresh rate monitor that is 60 Hertz and a sim that is set up for 60 FPS, you will have smooth frames wherever you go. And all you have to do, if your frame rate goes down a little, is move the draw distance down a little as well until your frame rate is exactly where you want it. And you can max out all your sliders if you want. And that's exactly what I do. I max out my sliders and I enjoy like 30 to 60 FPS wherever I go. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. That concludes the hardware series. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. Don't forget I run a giveaway on Sim Market vouchers every single month. To be in with a chance to win, all you have to do is subscribe to my channel and leave a comment down below in any one of these videos. And at the end of the month, I go live with a vlog. I do a catch up with my life, and then I announce the giveaway winner. And your vouchers are sent out to you, which you can spend on flight sim add-ons for any simulator you like. Doesn't matter which one. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.